Hare Krishna. Indian philosophy today on this new moon. And this morning while I was eating my breakfast, a little bit of scrambled eggs and organic scrambled eggs and some coffee. The oatmeal looked kind of gross in there today, so I went with the eggs. I'd try not to eat the eggy weggies too much. The Yoga Sutra here, this is in the section on the Orthodox Systems. This is chapter 13 of Indian philosophy, edited by Sarvepalli Radhakrishna. Radhe Krishna. Radha is Krishna's wife. Radha, Ray, and Charles A. Moore. Well, look at all the doggies. Everyone's walking their doggies here in Marblehead at my free gym. So much for not making videos on my day off. Should I read the introduction here to this part or just go right into the Yoga Sutra? Because the introduction tells you... So let's just read the whole thing. Yeah. The word yoga has become well known in the West, though its different meanings and its deeper significance and purpose are not well understood. For Patanjali, 2nd century BC, 2-3, the founder of the yoga system and the author of the basic text, the Yoga Sutra, Yoga is discrimination between subject and object, Purusa, self or spirit, and Prakriti, nature, which means the establishment of the self in its purity. Yoga, according to Patanjali, is a methodical effort to attain perfection through the control of the different elements of human nature, physical and psychical. The main interest of Patanjali is not metaphysical theorizing, but the practical motive of indicating how salvation can be attained by disciplined activity. The yoga system accepts the Samkhya psychology and metaphysics. However, it is definitely more theistic than the Samkhya, as evidenced by the addition of God to the Samkhya's 25 elements of reality. What the Samkhya calls Mahat, the Great One or Buddhi, as described in the previous chapter, is called Citta, C-I-T-T-A, mind stuff, in the yoga system. Citta, mind stuff. It undergoes modifications when it is affected by objects through the senses. The consciousness of Purusa reflects in it Citta. The consciousness of Purusa reflected in it, Citta, gives rise to the impression that it is the experiencer. Citta is really the spectacle of which, mind stuff, Citta, is really the spectacle of which the self is by reflection the spectator. We have as many Cittas, mind things, as there are selves. The ego is different from the self and is dependent on the experience of the world. Ego, personality. It's different from the self and is dependent on the experience of the world. The life of the ego is restless and unsatisfied, being subject as it is to the 5 afflictions of 1, ignorance or the mistaking of the non-eternal for the eternal. 2, the erroneous identification of oneself with the instruments of body and mind. 3, attachment to pleasant things. 4, hatred of unpleasant things. And 5, the instinctive love of life and the dread of death. That is why the ego is restless and unsatisfied, because it is subject as it is to the 5 afflictions. The last one being the instinctive love of life and the dread of death. When the self is freed from Citta or mind stuff, it withdraws itself into its own pure nature. The special feature of the yoga system is its practical discipline by which the suppression of mental states is brought about through the practice of spiritual exercises and the conquest of desire. Desire. The yoga gives us the eightfold method of abstention, observance, posture, breath control, withdrawal of the senses, fixed attention, contemplation, and concentration. 8. Remember, eighth letter is H, and you put H and 8 together and you get height. The first two of these refer to the ethical prerequisites for the practice of yoga. We should practice nonviolence, truthfulness, honesty, continence, and non-acceptance of gifts. We should observe purification, internal and external, contentment, austerity, and devotion to God. Posture, postur, is a physical aid to concentration. Breath control aids serenity of mind. Abstraction of the senses from their natural functions helps to keep the mind still. These 5 steps are indirect or external means to yoga. In fixed attention, we get the mind focused on a particular object. Contemplation or meditation leads to concentration. Concentration with centeredness, a Varation ray. Sun. Yoga is identified with concentration or samadhi, where the self regains its eternal and pure free status. This is the meaning of freedom or release or salvation in the yoga system. Through yogic practices, one can attain supernormal powers. The classical authors do not encourage the acquisition of these powers, as they consider spiritual calm and moral virtue to be superior to magical powers, which are only incidental to the attainment of the true goal of spiritual freedom. For the source from which selections are taken, see footnote 1. Selections are taken from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali with the Yoga Bhāsya of Vyasa, 4th century AD, and the Tattva Vasadradi of Vasapati Misra, 850 AD, translated by Rama Prasada, Sacred Books of the Hindus, Chapter 4, Allahabad, the Panini Office, 3rd edition, 1924. All the sutras are quoted with commentary where necessary for explanation or clarity. And now we'll start reading the Yoga Sutra, Chapter 1, Concentration, Samadhi. 1. Now a revised text of yoga. 2. Or now an explanation of yoga. Yoga, I'm not going to read all the footnotes from here on. I'm just going to pass over them. Yoga is contemplation, samadhi, and it is a characteristic of the mind pervading all its planes. Yoga is contemplation, samadhi, and it is a characteristic of the mind pervading all its planes. The planes of the mind are wandering, which is ksipta, ksipta, forgetful, mudha, occasionally steady or distracted, vikshipta, one-pointed, which is ekagra, and restrained, which is niruddha. Of these, the contemplation in the occasionally steady mind does not fall under the heading of yoga, because of unsteadiness appearing in close sequence. The commentator now removes the doubt as to the meaning of the word yoga, which arises from its ordinary connotation. Thus says he, yoga is contemplation. The word yoga is derived from the root yuj, to contemplate, and not from the root yujir, to join, in which latter case it would mean conjunction. Oh, interesting. Yoga is the restraint of mental modifications. That's 2. Yoga is the restraint of mental modifications. The mind is possessed of the 3 qualities. 5. Showing as it does the nature of illumination, activity, and inertia. from YB. That particular state of the mind in which the manifestations of real cognition have been restrained is the state of yoga. 3. Then the seer stands in his own nature. The objects of Purusa, self, are discriminative knowledge and the experience of the objective world. These two no longer exist in the state of inhibition, nirodha. 4. Identification with modifications elsewhere. The conscious principle Purusa is not unaffected by whatever may be the modifications of the mind in the state of outgoing activity. And so in the aphorism, quote, knowledge is but one, discrimination alone is knowledge, unquote. The mind is like a magnet, energized by nearness alone. Being seen, it becomes the possession of its lord, the Purusa. The Purusa, remember, is principle, the conscious principle. Therefore, the reason for knowing the modifications of the mind is the eternal relation of the Purusa. The notions, quote, I am calm, unquote, and, quote, I am ruffled, unquote, I am forgetful, unquote, appear by fastening the modifications of the will to be upon the conscious principle, by taking the will to know and the conscious principle to be one on account of proximity, as in the case of the white crystal and the japa, Chinese rose, flower. This happens in the same way as one looking at his face reflected in a dirty mirror becomes anxious and thinks, I am dim. And similarly does the Atma or Atman, self, appear to possess false knowledge, although in reality he has no false knowledge. He appears as the enjoyer, although he is not the enjoyer. He appears as possessed of discriminative knowledge and illumined thereby, although devoid of it in reality. 5. The modifications are fivefold, painful and not painful. The painful are those that cause the afflictions and become the field for the growth of the vehicle of actions, which is called karmasaya. The not painful are those that have discrimination for their object and which oppose the functioning of the qualities. And then 6, real cognition, unreal cognition, imagination, deep sleep, and memory. Hare Krishna.